Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the sales webinar series here at Ball State University. Today, we have a guest who's been the farthest. We have actually seen guests from Europe, but this is the farthest we're going to have from Australia. So we have JC Mignon, who works for an ad tech company, who is going to share with us his insights about how to tackle this idea of virtual selling and hybrid selling. JC, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I know that it's going to be a busy day for you ahead, so we really appreciate the time that you're taking to talk to us. Huh?
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So, JC, tell me about what is your current role? What is your current position within your organization?
Yeah, so I'm the director here for the APAC region, which implies that I look after our sales teams as well as the general day-to-day operations of the business here.
Fantastic. Tell me about the typical sales person that you're looking at. Are you talking about a person who visits the customers or does a lot of things over the phone and videos and that kind of stuff?
So the majority of our sales cycle does take place on a virtual level.
Yeah.
And then depending on the size of the customer, there would be a physical interaction as well, as in we might meet up with the client at their offices or they would come over to our offices. Yeah.
Fantastic. So essentially, we can learn a lot from you because essentially, since COVID, there's a lot of research coming out that says that traditional face-to-face selling is going to be replaced by this concept of hybrid selling. So I want to cut to the chase straight away. So if I were to use the term hybrid selling, have you heard the term before, or is it business as usual for you all the time?
I've heard it before, but for us, it's always been like that. I previously was working in Ireland, so the HQ for the European division there. And that was by default. We weren't able to fly every time over to the respective regions that we were working on. And in Australia, that's exactly the same. The distances are too big. When we are talking to clients, we're currently based in Sydney, but if we are going to be onboarding clients in Western Australia, in Perth, that's a 4-hour flight. It does not make sense to fly out there. So yeah, we onboard them through Zoom meetings, through Google Hangouts, and we've been doing so for the last 5-6 years.
So even before COVID and asking people. So let me pick your brains on this because I am more used to the traditional way of selling, right? The traditional way of face-to-face selling that involves maybe some kind of cold calling. Even that is changing, of course. But now one of the things that we hear a lot when we have to do lead generation, right? And you cannot do cold calling. And increasingly, there is this talk about social selling, right? So how can I get my salespeople who cannot visit the customer face to face? I need them to get on social media, on LinkedIn, and post messages. So what would be your recommendation for those kind of people who are not comfortable doing that? But how should they go about harnessing the power of LinkedIn to kind of do lead generation and get their name out?
Yeah. What we do recommend to all of our employees is to build up a personal brand as well. That implies that you will be probably like posting certain articles, but you want to do so with the conviction of these are things that I believe in. These are things that are important to me. And it shouldn't just be a copy paste of something that has been published by the company. That's one thing. Second thing is it's also no longer a hard sale, whereas that might have been the case in the past. Now, the idea is that you inspire your customers, that you can provide a solution. And often we do so by by publishing content that might not be entirely related with what we're doing. A fantastic example of that is HubSpot. HubSpot does that very well. If you need to look up, for example, I'm going to say you need a privacy policy for your website. You just Google it, and I'm sure that HubSpot has a website built out with that particular content. Now, are they a company specialized in that? No, they are not. But by doing so, they become a thought leader. That is something that then their employees can leverage. So there is a lot of content that's being produced, and their employees can leverage that to get that social conversation going. That often is then used as an icebreaker with your prospects, because your prospects might engage in an industry group on LinkedIn, for example, digital marketing in Australia. They have a question, and you can immediately jump in. You can say, hey, we have something about that. Here you go. And in the end, the industry is not that big, so one always meets one again. So as a result, if you can help me now, I'll probably come back to you afterwards.
That's very interesting. So essentially what you're saying is that for any person out there who is now forced or is faced with the task of their organization asking them to go into social selling mode or things like that, it's not that you have to completely panic. It's essentially trying to make sure that what you are actually doing, that you maybe read an industry article, take it with you and give it to your existing clients. You do the same thing, but learn the etiquette of social selling and saying, okay, I need to get part of certain groups. I need to be looking at what they're saying, and the same content that I would have been perfectly okay sharing with an existing client, I then should be able to say how I can do this. But tell me a lot about this idea. Should I just respond to that, or should I then start doing tags? You know, there's a lot of things about when you do social media, they say hashtag this, hashtag that. So are those also the kind of things that you encourage people to learn more about so that you get noticed as well?
You can, yes. You can. It's not something that we do an awful lot of. But yes, obviously it is a possibility. Another thing that's also quite common in the industry is the usage of technology. They often say that, like, for a good salesperson, what is critical is good technology. So you can even automate the entire game of social selling, which means that you have automated articles that are being published to your feed. So every day there's going to be a drip feeding taking place of content that's being published out there about your brand. I leave it in the middle if it's something you think is good or is bad, but it is a possibility.
But the fact that's interesting, right? Because I think for traditional people who sell pumps, who sell the traditional B2B, asking them to do drip feed might be one step too far, because at least their personal belief could be that they need to be doing it face to face, which means that there should be a certain amount of personalization. So the moment you make it into a drip feed, you can make it personalized, but it's not the same for people who are not used to it, correct?
Yes, but even then, you probably have an element of technology that comes into place, and that is then slightly different than social selling in specific. Don't get me wrong, social selling can still be relevant there, but then we switch gears and we go into prospecting. So how do you find the buyer persona to buy pumps, for example? And again, there is an awful lot of technology out there to identify exactly who is responsible for that in specific companies, and how can you reach them? So again, technology to identify the email address, or say with a 95% certainty, this is going to be their email address. And then it's all up to you. You have to make that first impression, and often that first impression is going to be over email.
That's interesting. So before I get into the aspect of email, we're still in prospecting, so it's good that you talk about this. So now you talked about automating, right? But the fact is that social selling is still going into a public domain and respond to that, and then maybe go into LinkedIn email or things like that, right? So essentially, if you want to engage, so one is, of course, you want to be seen as a thought leader, build your personal brand. What are your thoughts and what do you tell your people about, let's say, for example, you find somebody that's interesting, you kind of want to connect with them. Do you also suggest then that when you try to connect with a person, that you try to have a small personalized message to see why you want to connect with them? You know what I mean? Or you just connect with them blindly if you've never met that person before?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Might put me on the spot here, but we
Yeah.
do use a framework that is called the 4 Rs.
Yeah.
And what it implies is that you're going to structure your email according to 4 Rs. And
Yeah.
the first one is research. And so you
Yeah.
always want to customize it with something that the person
Yeah.
has connected with. They might have posted something. Hey, I'm looking for a
Yeah.
digital marketeer. Can
Yeah.
anybody recommend me someone?
Yeah.
That is great if you can offer immediately something
Yeah.
to that. Second thing is you want to be relevant. Whatever you're going to offer to them, if it's not relevant, they're not going to read it.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to miss one R somewhere, but the last one is reward.
Yeah.
Is you also want to give something to the client, like why would it be good for them to connect with you,
Yeah.
essentially. So you have to try the art of a salesperson, or one skill that a salesperson should master is the art of being able to make successful introduction over email.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And in fact, and sometimes I'm now even talking about that 100 or 140 characters that I have on LinkedIn to say, hey, JC, will you connect with me? Even that is an art form, right? That's not just
Yeah.
something that's an art. That I think is what is very interesting, especially for traditional salespeople who now have to move into, let's say, I post something on LinkedIn, I do all that, I see somebody likes my post. So that could be a prospect. So I want to reach out to them, but I need to connect with them first. But then how do I write that message? So the next step, as you said, was prospecting and emailing, right? So essentially, what are the do's and don'ts when you're sending an email? So let's say, for example, you have purchased a database and for some reason your company has the money, you use Zoom Info. So using Zoom Info, you collected all the necessary information. Tell me, what are the kind of things that you should be saying in an open introductory email where the person on the other side does not know who you are? Because today I was reading an article that said that as COVID spoiled email prospecting for salespeople, saying that apparently there's a glut of emails because everybody is stuck at home, everybody is not being able to visit the customers, and they're sending out emails, and email as a lead generation, they say, is almost dying again. So tell us what you tell your people about how to do this art of emailing, especially to a prospect.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things that can be done. I think the first thing you have to decide is, which industry am I in?
Hmm.
What is the value of a transaction? Based on the value of the transaction, it's going to determine an awful lot of things.
Hmm.
If you are in the business of acquiring a Fortune 500 company for a multi-million-dollar deal, then you're probably not going to go with an email, but you might go for a soft approach and try to send them a small gift, or something, again, as an icebreaker to get a conversation going. Again, you're not going to close a deal over
Yeah.
email in the majority of cases. It isn't a way of getting an introduction. So I fully agree that email has become much more difficult in the last year. You're going to need to look at alternative sources potentially, which could be a LinkedIn, which could be a social interaction.
Yeah.
But what we see that's very important as well is recommendations.
Yeah.
What we try to work with is, and that's even in personal life. If you go to a web
Yeah.
shop nowadays, you want to buy something, the likelihood of you buying it, or the connection with you buying something and the product having a good rating, is very high. But if the product has a poor rating, the likelihood that you'll continue with your purchase is quite low. It's the same thing in professional sales in this case. If you can prove that other clients similar to the buyer persona you're trying to convince, if they have trust in you as a person and in your product, that goes that goes really a long way. So we as a company focus a lot on Shopify reviews, on because our product partners with Shopify, G2 Crowd, which is a review platform for tech, case studies that we build out, case studies with well-known brands. And if those clients can say something positive about what we do, and obviously that has to be genuine, that goes really a long way. And if you can then match up the right case study with the right buyer persona that you're trying to acquire, that makes things a lot easier. Lastly, and that is really where it gets very interesting, is if you've built up such a good relationship with the client that you can go and say, do you think you'd like to introduce me to some of your colleagues in the industry? And that is the ultimate. Like if you can achieve that level, you're good.
And you shouldn't be afraid to ask that too, right? Because sometimes salespeople might be hesitant to ask people to. Hey,
they know you're in sales.
Yeah,
they know you're in sales, but you do it in an elegant manner, right?
Indeed. So, JC, tell me about this. I hear a lot about this. I've been teaching this a lot, but in the last year, it's becoming more and more the norm, is that because emails are kind of dying out, they're now talking about video messages.
Yes.
Tell me something, is that something that you have also seen in your business as your competitors, or is not just your competitors, right? Because if you were in that business all along, it's okay. But now in comes all the pump manufacturers, the compressor manufacturers, everybody sending emails in some form or the other. So your email box of the potential client is getting flooded. So even in your normal business, have you actually moving a little bit more towards video messaging, which is a unique way of trying to get the attention of the people?
Yes, that is another option, which again is very good. You need to have the right salespeople for it as well, because it's an additional barrier. It's quite easy to hide behind a text email and just write something, and hopefully they'll respond back. But you don't put yourself out there as much as you would with a video content, similar with the recording that we're making today. So you have to be okay with that. But it's definitely something that is gaining a lot of traction. I personally got an outreach like that last week, and it was over LinkedIn. And now LinkedIn allows as well to send small messages. And I loved it because the lady that was selling her business, she made a 2-minute video and showed me exactly everything that the product was doing. So she had a voiceover of a demo of the product, and within probably 120 seconds, which was the total duration of the video, I had a good idea what they were doing. And she's like, they'll probably show you a few interesting features as bait, with the idea then to go, okay, let's continue the conversation. And again, we have to go back to the goal of this type of outreach. It's an icebreaker. You want to open up the conversation. Once that you've done that, then you can continue in the actual sales cycle, which will obviously take still perhaps like a few weeks.
Indeed. That's interesting, right? So essentially, this person's first email to you was 2 minutes long with a kind of a recorded demo kind of stuff, small demo kind of stuff. But my point is that, what do you think? Obviously, you were hooked by the message in 2 minutes, but they say that 2 minutes might be too long for a video message. Let's say they even 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 45, 1 minute. So what held your attention to stay there for 2 minutes? Was it the relevance of the content?
Excellent point. It has to do with like the first 30 seconds. So if you would say like, okay, an ideal video has to be 30 seconds, something like that, because otherwise if it's too long, it doesn't hold my attention. But if you can grab the attention in the first 30 seconds, then it's absolutely okay to explain what your product does, because I want to find out more. So I guess it also depends on what is the product that you're selling.
Yeah.
If you can almost explain it a little bit in that period of time,
would you say then that if that person was taking a risk with that 2 minute video, right? Because they might have invested in it, and maybe luckily for you, you listened to it. But
Yeah.
what if there were situations where they might not? So would it make sense to say, I'm going to give you a short message with a 30-second message, and if you're interested, here is a link for you to go look at a longer version. You see what I mean? Would that be a better message?
Absolutely, and that's something that you can do as well. What I would say is the most important again at that point is technology. If you have the right insights about this, how long did people watch the video? At what point did they exit the video? Did they click through to a link that you sent, which potentially had additional information? And there are a lot of businesses that are currently providing this type of technology, these type of insights. So you know exactly how your prospect is behaving based on the outreach that you're doing. And accordingly, you can alter it. You can say, okay, I'm going to send out a shorter video. I'm going to send out a longer video, and you can adjust it. What we typically recommend to our sales reps is we start off with a research. So again, companies like, I'm going to say the same example, but HubSpot will definitely have posted an article, a thought leadership about the length of how long a video outreach should be. So you're going to take that as a starting point. And if you can take that as a starting point and then top it up with some additional technology to adjust what you're seeing exactly, then you have an ideal setup.
Fantastic. So now let's move on to the next step of the sales process. You've the introduction, you've had this, and let's say now you actually have the chance to talk to somebody, and now they've told you it's COVID, you can no longer visit them, and you need to prepare for a meeting that is not going to be face to face. Tell me, when I'm not doing face to face, what kind of preparation do you suggest your team? In your case, it was business as usual before, but what kind of preparation do you suggest for a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting? So what do you ask your team to do before that meeting? And this is a prospect who is just agreed to meet you for the first time.
Yeah. In reality, it's not too different from an in-person meeting. The same questions, the same question tirade goes on, where you go, who's the buyer persona? How long have they been at the company? How many people are in their team? Who are they currently working with? What's their vendor? Do you have an idea? And I can go on with this question tirade, but the best training that I had when I started is my manager was asking me nonstop for 2 minutes as many questions as he could. And if I could not answer a single one, my research wasn't done. I had to go back. And that, I think, is a really good way of looking into, are you prepared for a meeting? The risk that takes place nowadays is that because it's a meeting that is taking place over video conference, there is not as much personal interaction in that case. People might say, I'm gonna wing it and let's see what happens. And that, I think, is a little bit dangerous.
Indeed. Jesse, tell me about this. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot of complaints exactly from a lot of typical normal face-to-face interacting salespeople is you can't do the small talk, that you can't get to know the person, and because you're there for a particular time span, you have to stick true to that. But I'm also getting a set of people now who are actually saying, no matter what happens, make time for 2, 3, or 4 minutes of idle chat, at least to break the ice, because this is a prospect who's never worked with you in the past, that they have to get a feel because this is the best you can do. You cannot visit them. This is the best you can do. If it's a third or a fourth meeting, it makes sense, right? So would you recommend that, to say, okay, maybe a little bit of icebreaker to tell the kind of person that you are and to sort of see how they respond to it?
You can and you should.
Yeah.
Is my take on it. The best way to go for to build an interaction with someone is to ask a question about them. People love talking about themselves. If you have a specific question to ask about something that implied them, I'm going to give an example. We have a technology in place which is called Outreach, outreach.io. They have a page per prospect, and that is immediately going to pull certain things, and you can customize what it is that you want to see. It goes as crazy as you can see the weather where that prospect is based. But what I think is a lot more interesting is where you can see the latest feed about their company. So last time I was talking to a client, and you can actually see that they just filed for IPO. Well, that is fantastic, because then you can ask them a question. How does it feel to be going IPO? Oh, fantastic. And they'll go on. And before you know it, like, these 4 minutes are over, and you need to say, stop talking, because we need to talk business now. So yeah.
That's great. And should that initial conversation, should it have to be like this, or can it also be personal? Let's say, for example, I was told that there is this app called detective.io or something like that, where it also says not just the feed of the company, but the feed of JC, what he's saying on Twitter, what he's saying on Facebook, what he's doing on LinkedIn. So it all pulls it into one page to give a kind of who you are as an individual. So in those kind of situations, would you talk a little bit more about more sanitary kind of questions, or would you also talk something personal there as well?
Interesting. And that's just like my personal conviction. I think if it is publicly available, it could be okay. And then I'm saying it could be. That means if someone has their LinkedIn is often publicly available, Twitter often is publicly available. It is okay to interact about these. Like, let's say that the person you're talking to is a well-known fintech personality and publishes a lot of articles, then absolutely yes. Should you go and have a look at someone's Facebook or Instagram to see what they did last weekend? Probably not. That's gonna be a bit weird. That being said, and this is where things evolve really quickly. We work with salespeople who are younger often than me. As a result, it's a new generation. I have a few salespeople on the team, and they are account managers. So they are in a long-term relationship with their clients. Because of that, they have their clients on their Instagram, and they know what their clients were doing in the weekend, and vice versa. And that to me is very different. I wouldn't do that.
But JC, but that's still an account existing client, right? Because that's quite different, because at least from that perspective, you have some sort of a history that, again, they would not continue talking to you if you're not delivering on your promises. But imagine for a prospect, that was my question. It could be that, but I did not know that you can have those kind of personalized, if I'm talking to a person, depending upon where they're supposed to be working, you have the weather, and you can talk about those kind of small things. I love this. I also like the fact that before you do this, just like any call, you do a pre-call planning that includes doing this and to what extent, when we talk about telling our salespeople to do face-to-face, we say you need to have a clear agenda and set the agenda during the call. Is that also something that you would also do in a kind of a virtual selling situation as well?
Yeah, very important. The old theories regarding spin are definitely still in place. You want to ensure that you check the time that you want to qualify the lead. What is their decision-making authority? Do they have other people in the process? Should other people be included? So those are the basics. And if you don't have them, it's going to be a hard time. So agenda setting, very important. You don't want to be this close to going into your actual pitch, and then the client says, sorry, I have a hard stop in 2 minutes.
Indeed. Good. So now regarding technology itself, how would you react if the customer asks you to use a platform that you're not comfortable with? How do you prepare for that as a salesperson? Because at the end of the day, you're completely at the mercy of your customers, right? It's not that you can say, Zoom and Zoom it is. You can try for it, but how do you prepare for technology and those kind of things? Because you know what I mean? At the end of the day, do you have to spend some time up front, even getting comfortable with the kind of technology the customer is maybe forcing you to use for that meeting?
Yes. I think it's best practice that you have at least the applications of Zoom on your computer, of Microsoft Teams, even though that our business is completely running on Gmail. So we're defaulting to Google Hangouts. But yesterday I was talking to a client. They are working on Teams and their meeting rooms are connected with Teams. So he wanted to present us on the screen, and that was only possible if we're having the meeting through Teams. So you as a professional salesperson have to be aware of at least the main technologies, ensure that you have all of them at least installed on your computer, so you don't lose 3, 4, 5 minutes at the start of the meeting trying to install the right technology and already having made a bad impression with the prospects.
Fantastic. Now, in the interest of time and your time as well, I want to move further along the sales process. And let's say you do everything and you go through the normal sales process and you want to close. Is closing virtually any different than closing face-to-face?
It is, I think. The most important is that you see the person over camera, at least, so you can get an idea of how are they feeling, how are they responding when you're delivering the proposal. Again, technology is trying to get more insights about that. At which slide did they stop watching the proposal and those kind of things? How long did they look at the proposal? How often did they open up the proposal? Did they send it through to someone else? But my idea is if you can present it yourself, never send through a proposal and assume they're going to read it. Always set up that follow-up call so you can talk through it. And in the end, the closing cycle is not going to be that different, as in you have to ask for the close. And that's what a lot of people are not always that comfortable with. But it's okay. It's if you have a good solution, you have to be comfortable to ask for the close.
Indeed. It's very interesting you talk about this, because the other day I was either in a webinar. I do not know which technology it was. It was probably not Zoom, but actually maybe it was WebEx. In a meeting, WebEx will tell you whether the participant is paying attention, yes or no. You can actually, if you go in and zoom in on participants, again, if you have multiple participants, let's say, because the fact is when you're presenting a screen, you only have a kind of a subset of the people who could be in the call there with you on the video. If there are 5 or 6 people, and essentially you can, I think in WebEx, if I run on participants, it tells me if people are paying attention, yes or no. Now, of course, it could be that I could be seeing sideways and stuff like that, but that is going back into what you're saying. That's pretty interesting from that perspective. Huh?
That might have an impact on WebEx popularity, I'd say, but that's my opinion.
I think it was WebEx. I do not know. But the fact is that from a class perspective, if I'm a professor, that's not a bad thing to know, huh? To see whether people are showing attention, yes or no. So essentially, I think that would be interesting. And then I should be careful. I thought it was WebEx, but I thought as a professor, it was really cool that I can keep track if I want to see if people are paying attention. But I can easily translate that into a sales call or a sales situation, where that could be the case as well. Well, and the last thing, any tips that you would make for young upcoming salespeople who now are dealing with, they've always wanted to be in face-to-face selling? What kind of suggestions would you make if they are now faced with these kind of virtual selling or hybrid selling, which is a combination of face-to-face and virtual selling?
Adapt as soon as you can. Embrace all the new technologies out there, because they're there to stay, and it's the ones that can adapt the fastest that will be the most successful.
JC, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. And for the participants, I just wanted to save this for the last. JC was one of my students a long time ago, and it's with a great measure of pride that I have to say he's done far better than what I ever taught him in class. So again, JC, thank you so much for everything. And I hope that you are very successful in having your team crack all the challenges faced with everything that Corona technology is going to throw at you, and you're going to have a crack sales team as well. Thank you so much.
Very welcome.